The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Sarah wheeled her daughter Emma through the ornate gates. Emma, a bright 8-year-old with sparkling blue eyes, had been born with cerebral palsy, but her spirit remained unbroken despite the challenges she faced daily. Sarah had saved for months to bring Emma to London, hoping the trip would lift her daughter's spirits after a difficult year of medical treatments. The palace grounds buzzed with tourists from around the world, cameras clicking and voices chattering in different languages. Emma's wheelchair moved slowly across the uneven stones, each bump causing her slight discomfort, but she pressed forward with determination. Her eyes searched eagerly for the famous horse guards she had read about in her favorite books back home in Ohio. As they approached the horse guards parade, Sarah noticed Emma's breathing becoming more labored. The excitement and physical exertion of the morning were taking their toll on her small frame. Sarah found a quiet spot near the side of the parade ground where they could rest and watch from a distance. Emma's face showed disappointment as she realized they were too far away to see the horses clearly. Captain James Mitchell had been serving with the Household Cavalry for 15 years, and his bond with his horse Wellington was legendary among the guards. Wellington, a magnificent black gelding with intelligent brown eyes, seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to read human emotions. The horse had been specially selected not just for his imposing stature and perfect gait, but for his gentle temperament that made him ideal for public ceremonies. On this particular morning, Captain Mitchell noticed something unusual about Wellington's behavior. The horse kept turning his head toward a section of the crowd where a young girl sat in a wheelchair, her mother standing beside her with a worried expression. Wellington's ears pricked forward, and he began to move in that direction, despite Mitchell's gentle guidance to stay in formation. Other tourists pressed forward, eager to take photographs with the imposing guards and their magnificent horses. The crowds grew thicker, and Sarah realized with growing concern that Emma was being pushed further back, unable to compete with the able-bodied visitors who easily maneuvered around them. Emma's face fell as tall adults blocked her view completely, their excitement drowning out her quiet requests to move closer. Wellington continued to show unusual behavior, repeatedly looking toward Emma's location. Captain Mitchell, trained to maintain strict discipline during ceremonies, found himself puzzled by his horse's persistent interest in one particular spot in the crowd. The horse began to step sideways, moving gradually away from his assigned position, something that was completely out of character for the usually obedient animal. Sarah bent down to speak quietly to Emma, trying to hide her own frustration at the thoughtless behavior of some tourists. She explained that they might need to leave soon if Emma became too tired, but promised they could try again another day. Emma nodded bravely, though tears threatened to spill from her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and the reality was proving to be much more challenging than she had imagined. As the morning ceremony continued, other horses in the guard began to display similar behavior. Sergeant Phillips, riding a beautiful bay mare named Victoria, noticed his horse also seemed drawn to the same area where the young girl sat. Victoria's usual perfect posture became more relaxed, and she began to move with a gentler gait, as if sensing something that required a more careful approach. The commanding officer, Major Thompson, observed the unusual behavior of his horses with growing interest. In his 25 years of service, he had seen horses react to many different situations, but this coordinated response was something entirely new. The horses seemed to be communicating with each other through subtle body language, creating an almost choreographed movement toward one section of the crowd. Emma noticed the horses beginning to move in her direction and felt a flutter of hope in her chest. She whispered to her mother about what she was seeing, and Sarah looked up to confirm that several of the magnificent animals were indeed heading their way. The crowd around them began to notice as well, with many tourists following the horses' movement with their cameras and curious stares. Wellington reached the edge of the parade ground closest to where Emma sat and stopped completely. Captain Mitchell, maintaining his professional composure despite his surprise, allowed the horse to remain in position. Wellington lowered his great head and extended his neck toward Emma, his dark eyes focused entirely on her small form. The crowd around them fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Emma's face transformed with pure joy as Wellington approached. She had never been so close to such a magnificent animal, and she could feel the horse's warm breath as he gently sniffed in her direction. Her small hands trembled with excitement as she reached out tentatively, not quite daring to touch the beautiful creature before her. Sarah watched in amazement as more horses began to gather around their location. Victoria approached from the other side, followed by 2 more guards and their mounts. The horses formed a natural semicircle around Emma's wheelchair, creating an intimate space that seemed to separate them from the busy crowd. The tourists who had been blocking Emma's view now found themselves on the outside, watching the remarkable scene unfold. Captain Mitchell made a decision that would later be talked about throughout the regiment. He dismounted from Wellington, something that was strictly against protocol during public ceremonies, and approached the young girl and her mother. His fellow guards followed suit, creating an unprecedented break in tradition that somehow felt completely appropriate for the moment. The horses remained perfectly still, as if they understood the significance of what was happening. Wellington moved even closer to Emma, lowering his head until it was level with hers. The girl's face glowed with wonder as she finally found the courage to reach out and gently stroke the horse's soft nose. The touch seemed to complete some kind of connection that had been building throughout the morning. Other families with children who had disabilities began to notice what was happening and moved closer. The guards and their horses seemed to sense the broader opportunity before them and began to include these families in the extraordinary moment. What had started as one horse's intuitive response to a single child was becoming something much larger and more meaningful. The commanding officers who had been watching from a distance realized they were witnessing something that transcended military protocol and tourist entertainment. This was a moment of genuine human connection facilitated by the remarkable intuition of their horses. Major Thompson made the decision to let the scene continue, understanding that some things were more important than strict adherence to ceremony. Emma's laughter rang out across the parade ground as Wellington gently nuzzled her hand. The sound seemed to encourage the other horses, who began to interact with more children and their families. The formal atmosphere of the military ceremony was replaced by something warmer and more personal. Yet the dignity and respect remained intact. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter experience pure happiness for the first time in months. The medical appointments, the worried conversations with doctors, the daily struggles with mobility, all of it seemed to fade away as Emma connected with these magnificent animals who had somehow recognized her need for this special moment. The crowd that had initially been focused on taking photographs and checking items off their tourist lists now found themselves witnessing something that would stay with them forever. People put away their cameras and simply watched, understanding instinctively that some moments were meant to be experienced rather than captured. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, the remarkable scene continued to unfold. The horses seemed to have infinite patience for their new friends, standing quietly as small hands explored their soft noses and gentle eyes studied their faces. The guards, initially uncertain about the break in protocol, began to smile as they watched the joy their horses were bringing to these special visitors. Wellington remained closest to Emma throughout the entire encounter, as if he had appointed himself as her personal guardian for the day. The bond between them was visible to everyone present, a connection that transcended species and spoke to something deeper about the capacity for understanding and compassion that exists in the natural world. Word of the extraordinary morning spread quickly through social media and local news channels. By afternoon, the palace grounds were filled with families who had heard about the horses' remarkable behavior. Many were families with children who faced various challenges, drawn by stories of the compassionate response they might receive from the famous guard horses. Emma and Sarah had returned to their hotel for lunch, but Emma could talk about nothing except Wellington and the magical morning they had shared. She drew pictures of the beautiful black horse on hotel stationery and asked her mother to help her write a thank you letter to Captain Mitchell. Sarah watched her daughter's enthusiasm with a heart full of gratitude, knowing that this experience had given Emma something precious that no medicine or therapy could provide. Back at the palace, Captain Mitchell found himself in an unusual position. Major Thompson had called an emergency meeting to discuss the morning's events and their implications for future ceremonies. The traditional military protocols seemed inadequate to address what had clearly become something much more significant than a standard tourist attraction. Wellington stood in his stable, still displaying the calm, attentive behavior that had characterized his interaction with Emma. The stable hands noticed that he seemed different, more aware of his surroundings and more responsive to the emotional states of the people around him. Other horses in the regiment showed similar changes, as if the morning's experience had awakened something special in all of them. Dr. Rebecca Harrison, a veterinary behaviorist who consulted for the household cavalry, was called in to observe the horses and provide her professional opinion on their unusual behavior. She had studied animal cognition for over 20 years, but had never witnessed such a coordinated response to human need. Her initial examination revealed that all the horses were in perfect physical health, suggesting that their behavior was purely instinctual and emotional. The palace administration faced an unexpected challenge. The morning's events had generated enormous positive publicity, with videos and photos spreading across the internet at an unprecedented rate. Requests for information poured in from around the world, with many families asking if they could bring their children with special needs to meet the horses. Emma's story had touched hearts globally. A video captured by a tourist showing Wellington's gentle interaction with her had been viewed millions of times, with comments in dozens of languages expressing amazement and admiration for the horse's intuitive kindness. Many viewers shared their own stories of animals showing extraordinary sensitivity to human suffering and joy. By evening, a plan had emerged from the palace discussions. Rather than treating the morning's events as an anomaly to be controlled, the administration decided to embrace the opportunity to create something meaningful and lasting. They announced the creation of special visiting hours specifically designed for families dealing with disabilities and medical challenges. The guards themselves were enthusiastic supporters of the new initiative. Captain Mitchell spoke for many of his colleagues when he expressed his pride in being part of something that brought such joy to children and families facing difficult circumstances. The formal ceremonies would continue as always, but these special sessions would allow for more personal and extended interactions. Training began immediately for both the guards and their horses to ensure these special visits would be safe and meaningful. Dr. Harrison worked with the cavalry to develop protocols that would allow the horse's natural instincts to guide the interactions while maintaining appropriate safety measures. The horses seemed to understand that they were being prepared for something important and responded to the training with unusual enthusiasm. Emma received a call that evening that would change her life forever. Palace representatives had tracked down her family through the viral video and wanted to invite her to return as their special guest for the inaugural session of the new program. She would not only meet Wellington again, but would also help establish the guidelines for future visits by children with special needs. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. What had started as a modest vacation to lift Emma's spirits had somehow evolved into her daughter becoming an ambassador for a groundbreaking royal initiative. Emma's excitement was infectious, and she immediately began planning what she would say to Wellington when she saw him again. The news media coverage of the developing story brought attention from disability advocacy groups, veterinary experts, and animal behaviorists from around the world. Many offered their expertise and support for the new program, recognizing its potential to provide therapeutic benefits for children and families dealing with various challenges. Dr. Sarah Collins, a pediatric therapist who specialized in animal-assisted therapy, flew in from Edinburgh to consult on the program development. She had worked with horses in therapeutic settings for over 15 years, but had never seen such natural, untrained therapeutic behavior from military horses. Her expertise would be crucial in ensuring that the interactions provided maximum benefit for the young visitors. The stable staff worked around the clock to prepare for the influx of special visitors. Additional safety equipment was installed, and the horses' schedules were adjusted to allow for longer, more relaxed interactions. Wellington seemed to sense the preparations and displayed an almost eager anticipation for what was to come. Local hospitals and disability organizations began receiving inquiries about the new program. Word spread through support groups and online communities, with families from across Europe expressing interest in visiting. The palace found itself in the unique position of having created something that was both a diplomatic initiative and a genuine therapeutic resource. Emma's second visit to the palace was arranged for the following week, giving the staff time to finalize their preparations. The little girl from Ohio would have the honor of being the first official participant in what was already being called the Gentle Guards program. Her experience would help shape how future visits would be conducted. Captain Mitchell spent extra time with Wellington, not training him for specific behaviors, but rather reinforcing the trust and communication that had made their partnership so effective during the initial encounter with Emma. The horse seemed to understand that he had been chosen for something special and carried himself with a quiet dignity that impressed everyone who worked with him. The veterinary team conducted thorough health checks on all the horses that would participate in the program. They wanted to ensure that the animals were not experiencing any stress from their new role and were pleased to discover that the horses actually seemed more relaxed and content than before. The opportunity to interact with children appeared to be fulfilling some natural nurturing instinct. International media attention continued to grow, with journalists and documentary filmmakers requesting access to cover the story. The palace decided to allow limited media coverage of Emma's return visit, understanding that the positive publicity could help other families learn about the program while maintaining the dignity and respect that the initiative deserved. Preparation packages were developed for families who would participate in future visits. These included information about what to expect, guidelines for interaction, and educational materials about the horses and their care. The goal was to ensure that every family arrived prepared to make the most of their time with the Gentle Guards. Emma practiced her thank you speech every day, wanting to express her gratitude properly to Wellington and Captain Mitchell. Sarah helped her daughter understand the significance of what was happening while keeping the focus on the simple joy of friendship with the remarkable horse who had changed their lives. The night before her return visit, Emma could barely sleep. She dreamed of Wellington and wondered if he would remember her. In the palace stables, Wellington stood quietly in his stall, but the stable hands noticed he seemed more alert than usual, as if he too was anticipating something special. Local volunteers had organized to help with the new program, many of them individuals who had been touched by the original video of Emma and Wellington. The outpouring of community support demonstrated how deeply the story had resonated with people who understood the value of compassion and connection in healing. As dawn broke on the day of Emma's return visit, both she and Wellington seemed to share a sense of eager anticipation. Neither the young girl nor the magnificent horse could have imagined how their first meeting would grow into something that would touch countless lives and create a lasting legacy of kindness and understanding. The stage was set for an encounter that would formally launch a program destined to become one of the most beloved and meaningful initiatives in the history of the royal household. Emma's courage, and Wellington's intuitive compassion had created something beautiful that would endure long after their own special friendship had become part of palace legend. The morning of Emma's official return arrived with perfect weather, as if nature itself wanted to contribute to the special day. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one that matched her eyes and brought out her smile. Sarah had barely slept, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what their simple vacation had become and the responsibility she felt to represent families everywhere who faced similar challenges. Wellington appeared to sense something significant about this particular morning. The stable staff reported that he had been unusually alert since dawn, standing at attention in his stall with his ears pricked forward, listening for familiar sounds. When Captain Mitchell arrived to begin their preparation, the horse immediately focused on him with an intensity that spoke of eager anticipation. A small gathering of officials, media representatives, and invited guests had assembled for the ceremony that would formally launch the Gentle Guards program. Among them was Dr. Harrison, who would be observing the interaction to continue her research into the therapeutic benefits of human-animal connections, and several families who would participate in future sessions. Emma's arrival at the palace gates was met with warm smiles from the guards, many of whom had heard about her story and were excited to meet the little girl who had inspired such positive changes. As her wheelchair moved across the familiar cobblestones, Emma's heart raced with excitement. She clutched a handmade card she had created for Wellington, decorated with drawings of horses and hearts. Captain Mitchell led Wellington into the specially prepared area where the meeting would take place. The space had been designed to accommodate wheelchairs and other mobility devices while maintaining the dignity and grandeur appropriate for a royal setting. As soon as Wellington entered the space, his eyes began searching the small crowd, and Emma was certain he was looking for her. The moment of reunion exceeded everyone's expectations. As Emma's wheelchair approached, Wellington immediately moved toward her with the same gentle determination he had shown during their first meeting. His recognition of her was unmistakable, and the joy on Emma's face was radiant as she realized that the magnificent horse had indeed remembered their friendship. This time, with more time and privacy, their interaction deepened beyond what anyone had anticipated. Wellington lowered his head to Emma's level and remained perfectly still as she reached out to stroke his nose and neck. The horse's patient stillness and gentle breathing seemed to have a calming effect on Emma's sometimes unpredictable muscle movements, allowing her to touch him with more control than she usually possessed. Dr. Collins, observing from nearby, was amazed by the therapeutic response she witnessed. Emma's physical tension decreased noticeably in Wellington's presence, and her speech became clearer and more controlled. The horse seemed to instinctively provide the kind of stable, non-judgmental presence that trained therapy animals required years of preparation to achieve. Other children who had been invited to participate in this inaugural session began to arrive with their families. 10-year-old Michael, who lived with autism and rarely spoke to strangers, approached Wellington with cautious interest. The horse seemed to adapt his energy to match Michael's needs, becoming even more still and quiet, allowing the boy to examine him thoroughly before deciding to make contact. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as her daughter not only reconnected with Wellington, but also began to interact confidently with the other children and their families. Emma had always been shy in group settings, but something about sharing this experience with Wellington gave her a confidence that transformed her usual hesitation into enthusiastic friendship. The success of the morning exceeded all expectations, but it was the individual moments that truly demonstrated the program's value. 7-year-old Lucy, who used a walker due to muscular dystrophy, found that Victoria, the bay mare, seemed to pace her movements to match Lucy's careful steps. When Lucy needed to rest, Victoria would stop and wait patiently, as if understanding that their journey together required a different rhythm. Captain Mitchell and his fellow guards found themselves deeply moved by what they were witnessing. These were the same horses that performed in grand state ceremonies, trained for precision and spectacle, yet they displayed a sensitivity and adaptability that no amount of formal training could have provided. Their natural instincts seemed perfectly attuned to the needs of their young visitors. Emma's presentation of her handmade card to Wellington became one of the most touching moments of the day. She had written, "Thank you for being my friend," in her careful handwriting, and as Captain Mitchell read the words aloud, Wellington seemed to listen intently. The horse gently nuzzled the card and then Emma's hand, as if acknowledging her gift. The media coverage of the event was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on the genuine connections being formed rather than treating the story as merely unusual or entertaining. Journalists from around the world recognized that they were documenting something significant about the capacity for cross-species understanding and the potential for healing through compassionate connection. As the formal ceremony concluded, the real magic began. The families were given extended time to simply enjoy being with the horses without cameras or schedules. Children who rarely had opportunities to interact with animals due to their medical conditions found themselves laughing and playing in ways their parents hadn't seen in months or even years. Emma discovered that she could communicate with Wellington through touch and gentle sounds that the horse seemed to understand perfectly. When she grew tired, he would move closer, providing a warm, steady presence that seemed to give her strength. When she was excited, he would become more animated, matching her energy while always maintaining his gentle nature. The transformative effect on the children was matched by the impact on their families. Parents who dealt daily with medical appointments, therapy sessions, and the constant worry that accompanies loving a child with special needs found themselves able to simply enjoy watching their children experience pure joy and acceptance. Major Thompson announced that based on the overwhelming success of the inaugural session, the Gentle Guards program would become a permanent initiative, with regular sessions scheduled throughout the year. Applications would be processed through medical professionals and disability organizations to ensure that families who would benefit most would have access to these special visits. Training programs were established to prepare additional horses and guards for participation in the expanding program. Wellington would serve as a mentor horse, helping to teach other animals in the regiment how to interact appropriately with children who had special needs. His natural abilities would become the standard that others would strive to achieve. Dr. Harrison published preliminary findings from her observation of the program, noting significant improvements in stress indicators among participating children and documenting behaviors in the horses that challenged existing understanding of animal cognition and empathy. Her work would contribute to broader research into animal-assisted therapy and the development of similar programs at other locations. Emma's story continued to inspire families around the world, but perhaps more importantly, it had given her a sense of purpose and confidence that extended far beyond her time with Wellington. She began speaking to other children with disabilities about her experience, encouraging them to pursue their own dreams despite the challenges they faced. The final moment of Emma's official visit came when Wellington was returned to his stable. As the goodbye approached, both Emma and the horse seemed reluctant to part. Wellington stood quietly beside her wheelchair for several long minutes, as if memorizing her presence. Emma whispered promises to write to him and to visit again soon. As Emma's family prepared to return to Ohio, she carried with her not just memories of an extraordinary experience, but a new understanding of her own worth and capabilities. The little girl who had struggled to see past her limitations had become an inspiration to others, and a catalyst for positive change that would continue long after her visit ended. Wellington returned to his regular duties with the knowledge that he had discovered a special calling. The magnificent horse continued to perform his ceremonial responsibilities with the same precision and dignity as always. But now he also served as a bridge between the formal traditions of the palace and the very human need for compassion and connection. The Gentle Guards program became a model for similar initiatives around the world, proving that sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts of kindness. Emma and Wellington's friendship had grown into something much larger than either of them, touching countless lives and demonstrating that healing and hope can emerge from the most unexpected encounters. Years later, Emma would return to visit Wellington many times, and their friendship would endure as she grew from a shy 8-year-old into a confident young woman who devoted her life to helping other children with disabilities. Wellington lived to be an old horse, spending his retirement years continuing to work with special visitors, his gentle spirit unchanged by age. Their story became part of palace legend, told to new guards and their horses as an example of the true meaning of service. It reminded everyone who heard it that the greatest ceremonies are not always the grandest spectacles, but sometimes the quiet moments when one soul reaches out to comfort another, regardless of species, and finds that kindness has the power to transform both the giver and the receiver in ways that echo through generations.